Now, somewhere just right about the corner here, there should be a yellow carcinite survey post, at the base of which is a stone. Well, I'm not seeing it, which means that maybe the tractors have finally gotten it. One of the things the veterans did was mark the field edges with small stones, and there was one here. I don't know where it is now. I'll have to come look for it. But anyway, Lilly puts two of his guns right here. And this part of the field looks pretty much as it did. The block of woods right there in front of us goes up a little bit too far to the north, but you can still see the Lafayette Road through the trees there. And the woods right over here should be a little bit thinner. But if you were an artillerist, think about being here. Look at all that open ground in your front. Now, as the battle action is going to unfold here, Wilder has deployed 4 of his 5 regiments along the edge of the woods here. They have knocked down the split rail fence that was along the edge of the woods. That's what the black zigzag line is on this map. And they've piled the rails up to create some crude field fortifications. Lilly has got his limbers and caissons parked back in the woods. And they are mostly positioned here in the morning and early afternoon to prevent any Confederates from using the Lafayette Road there in front. Wilder's skirmishers are in position in the woods on the other side of the Lafayette Road looking for any Confederate approach. About 2 o'clock, Wilder sees coming from the west across this field the Union Division of Jefferson Columbus Davis. And Davis's division has marched up from the south, stopped and received orders from Rosecrans at his headquarters at the Widow Glens, and now Davis is moving over here to execute those orders. Wilder goes to Davis, and Davis says, I've been told to go into the woods and support Van Cleve's division in the fighting, which has come southward and come closer to Wilder's position here. Wilder told Jefferson Davis, General Davis, you probably don't want to go into the woods on the other side of the road. There are lots of Confederates in the woods over there. Davis says, well, my orders are to go support Van Cleve. And so Davis forms his 2 small brigades, Haig's Brigade and Carlin's Brigade, and sends them into the woods on the other side of the Lafayette Road. And as the arrows on this map suggest, what happens to Davis's formation? He goes into the woods and indeed meets large numbers of Confederates and is driven out of the woods. His short line does not have either of its flanks anchored. Well, it was in this withdrawal of Davis's troops that Wilder made a brief counterattack to help drive these Confederates back. But Wilder then will come back to the edge of the woods here. Davis, in the meantime, has rallied his 2 brigades. He also now receives some reinforcements from Thomas J. Wood's division, which has marched up from the south on the Lafayette Road, and Buell's brigade and part of Harker's brigade will join Davis, and they will go into the woods. In this same time, the Confederates who had driven Davis out the first time have veered off to the northwest. They cross the Lafayette Road, mostly up here in the woods, although the left end of their line extends out into the field. The left end of that line is the 39th North Carolina. That's the small monument that you see there. Wilder actually shifted some of his men to fire in that direction, and those Confederates disappeared into that block of wood. This will cause Wilder and Lilly to further make a repositioning. They will spread the line out along the edge of the woods here and actually out into this field. And Lilly will move the 4 guns from down there, from probably about the area where the 6th Ohio Battery is, up into this direction and put them out into the field. 2 guns in one place, then a few yards away, 2 more guns. The 2 guns that had been here are left still at this corner. They do this while Davis and some of his supports, part of Harker and Buell, are fighting across the Lafayette Road there. But soon, another Confederate formation is going to attack. This is the division of John Bell Hood. It is normally 4 brigades, but only 3 of the 4 have arrived from or completed the trip from Virginia. And when these 3 brigades began moving, one of them, Law's Alabama Brigade, had veered off to the northwest. So only 2 of Law's 3 brigades will come into this area. But they come down and strike Davis and Wood. They come and flank Davis and Wood out of the woods, and they drive them back across the Lafayette Road. And Davis and Wood's men begin to go off in that direction. Well, these attacking Confederates are coming from northeast towards southwest, and they are driving the Federals in front of them. What do these attacking Arkansans, Texans, and Georgians not know is right over here? Wilder's brigade and the 18th Indiana Battery. And as the Federals withdraw across the field, Wilder prepares to order his men to open fire. Now, can Wilder immediately fire on the attacking Confederates?
No.
No, because what's withdrawing across his front? Friendly troops. Some of those friendly troops are probably wounded and moving rather slowly. But can Wilder wait indefinitely before opening fire? No. And Wilder eventually has to give the command to open fire. And he will, and about 1,200 men with the lever action magazine fed 7-shot Spencer repeating rifles will open fire, and Eli Lilly with his 6 guns will open fire as well. By that time, the Georgians and most of the Texans are crossing the Lafayette Road. They are moving diagonally across our front from our left to our right, from further away to closer, and as they come out of the woods, cross the road, they are moving down into that low ground that you see there in front of us. And they're moving off in that direction. When all of a sudden, the edge of the woods here erupts in that huge volume of fire. The Texans and Georgians seek cover. And this wet weather drainage, that ditch that Lilly had identified, is what they will find as cover. Henry Campbell will relate that as the sound of the battle gets closer, he says, the roar is perfectly awful. Nothing can be compared with it. If 10 million pieces of sheet metal were all shaken at once, it wouldn't be a drop in the bucket. The artillery shots were few compared to the musketry, because the woods were so thick, very few positions could be found for the batteries. About 3 o'clock, the rebels made a furious charge on us, drove the skirmishers back from the ditch in our front and occupied it. Captain Lilly moved forward 2 guns on the left to a position where he would rake the ditch from end to end, opened out with treble charges of canister down the ditch, which compelled the rebels to retreat in confusion. The ditch was literally full of killed and wounded, and proved to be a self-made grave for hundreds of them. Brigade made 1 charge, driving the rebels back in disorder at least half a mile. The tremendous, unceasing roar began to check up as the shades of evening appeared and ceased entirely about 7 o'clock. When Wilder opened fire here from the edge of the woods, the Texans and Georgians, the Arkansans are over on the left end of the line, not many of them cross the road, but the Texans and Georgians will take shelter in the ditch and low ground. Because these Confederates were advancing from northeast to southwest, they actually are advancing parallel to this arm of the ditch ravine that comes back this way. And particularly down closer to the woods, when Wilder opened fire, a lot of Georgians, the right flank of Benning's Georgia Brigade, went down into that ditch seeking cover. Wilder and Lilly had already become aware of that ditch. As you heard by Campbell's account, apparently some of Wilder's skirmishers were even using it as shelter. They're aware of it. It is dead space to them. They cannot fire directly down into it. But because they were aware of it, they also were aware of this arm of the ditch that runs back. Wilder orders Lilly to order Lieutenant Scott, the commander of the section of guns that was here at the corner of the woods, to move those 2 guns by hand out of the woods and to a clump of bushes so that they can fire down the length of that ditch. And that's what you see represented by the 2 guns directly there in your front. Lieutenant Scott's section firing down the arm of the ditch into the right flank of Benning's brigade. Now Campbell will write, Lilly himself will write that they were firing treble charges of canister. Now the most effective round for the 3-inch ordnance rifle were the exploding projectiles of shell or case shot. Since this is a rifle gun, having the spiral grooves on the inside of the barrel, it fires a bullet-shaped or cylindrical conical, as they would have said, projectile. And this Hotchkiss-style projectile is what Lilly's battery was most often firing. There was a solid version of this. The most common one was the hollow-bodied projectile. The interior of it is hollow, and on the interior there was, in the case of shell, an explosive charge, a powder charge. In case shot, there's the powder charge and some small iron or lead balls. And then there was a fuse mechanism. I've just unscrewed and taken out the fuse body, which would be screwed into the projectile. And then the most common fuse, the time fuse, a piece would be cut to a certain length given the distance they were going to fire, and press that into the opening in the fuse body. You'd load the projectile in the gun. When fired, some of the flame would reach around and hopefully light the fuse, cause the projectile to explode downrange. This is most commonly what was fired from the rifled guns. Weighs about 10 pounds. If anybody would like to handle it, I'll pass it around. Just don't drop it on your toes. You don't want to go limping back to your vehicle. But in this setting, this short range, the anti-personnel projectile canister would be much more effective. Canister was just a tin can full of small iron balls. This is the Hotchkiss-style canister for the 3-inch ordnance rifle. The iron balls would be packed in sawdust on the interior to keep them from shifting in shipment. And then this would be loaded into the gun with a powder charge behind it and fired. When the gun was fired, the tin can would rupture and the iron balls would be sprayed downrange, effective out to 400 yards. Now, firing canister out of a rifle gun is not quite as good because the can pick up a little bit of the rifling and start to spin just a little bit, and then as it exits the muzzle and the can ruptures, that spin can spray those balls out in a little greater arc than you might desire. Campbell and others say they fired treble charges of canister, which means 3 of these cans and 1 powder charge. They would load the powder charge in 1 can and then 2 others, and then fire. And all 3 of these cans of iron balls would be sprayed. Of course, you're not going to fire as far doing that. And I'll pass this around. It weighs probably about 8 pounds. Again, it could do damage to your toes, so just be careful of it. Lilly had apparently thought, as based on his experience on the 18th and having operated in this area, that maybe a little more canister would be valuable to have on hand, and had increased the amount available. But they are firing so much during this action that they're going through the canister very quickly, having to carry it forward from the caissons and the limbers. Campbell fired our guns with treble charges of canister. Each discharge would open great gaps in the rebels' ranks. Boys would carry up canister from the caisson by the armload. As you feel that round, how many could you carry? How many would you make yourself carry with the enemy coming that close? Used all the canister we had. Rebel sharpshooters tried their best to pick off Captain Lilly, who rode his horse all day and carried canister up from the caisson on horseback when the rebels charged us. This here at Chickamuaga, this round is going to be one of the potentially most effective because of the shorter range. But even though Lilly seems to have increased the number of canister rounds immediately available to him, he still is going to fire up all of those. By one account, it is said that he fired 200 rounds of the anti-personnel of canister in this fighting.
What was the rate of fire for these batteries?
It was possible in an emergency circumstance to load and fire these guns up to 4 times in 1 minute. But to achieve that rate of fire, you had to cease sponging the bore of the gun between each round. Now, that's hazardous because the powder charge is just in a cloth bag, and not all of the powder in the cloth burn up when the gun is fired. And the purpose of sponging was not to cool the gun, it was to hopefully extinguish all the embers from a previous discharge. And so, if you want to fire 4 rounds a minute, you got to stop sponging, which means as soon as the gun is discharged, the number 1 man steps forward with the sponge rammer, but with the rammer head at the muzzle. The number 2 man puts the next round in the muzzle, and the number 1 man immediately rams it home. What if there is an ember in the bore and it sets that next powder charge on fire prematurely? What's the number 1 man most likely going to lose?
Lower hand.
His hand, his forearms, his arms, even his life. And you can get the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion. You can find photographs of veterans of the artillery. And you can find photographs of number 1 men who are missing all or part of 1 or both arms as a result of premature discharges.
Were there any cannons on the Confederate side?
Well, there are,
Firing
but because of the woods, they have not been able to keep up as the Confederates attack forward, and they can't find any places from which to fire.
So small arms was the only thing they were
Small
receiving.
arms is the only thing the Confederates had. So. One of the participants in the battle, maybe even Wilder himself, will provide information to an Indianapolis newspaper that will publish on September 28th this account. Among the incidents of the battle, September 19th, Wilder described the fearful slaughter of Longstreet's men at the time they were driven back by our left wing. This celebrated corps, as desperate soldiers as ever lived, attacked two divisions, Davis's and Wood's, to the right and a little in front of Wilder, separated them and pushed on through the open space. Yelling, the rebel shout is a yelp instead of a civilized hurrah, and confident of victory. A portion of them had to cross a small field, behind which, in a bordering woods, Wilder lay, through which ran a ditch 5 or 6 feet deep to carry off water from an adjacent stream or swamp. As the rebels entered this field in heavy masses, fully exposed, the mounted infantry, with their 7-shot shooting Spencer rifles, kept up a continuous blast of fire upon them, while Lilly, with his Indiana battery, hurled through them double-shotted canister from his rifle, or his ordnance rifles, at less than 300 yards. The effect was awful. Every shot seemed to tell. The head of the column, as it was pushed on by those behind, appeared to melt away or sink into the earth, for though continuously moving, it got no nearer. It broke at last and fell back in great disorder. It was rallied and came on again, and with desperate resolution pushed through the solid fire to the ditch. Here all who could get it took shelter. Instantly, Lilly whirled 2 of his guns and poured right down the whole length of the ditch, his terrible canister. Hardly a man got out of the ditch alive. At this point, said Wilder, who has been seasoned to slaughter by being 200 times under fire, it actually seemed a pity to kill men so. They fell in heaps, and I had it in my heart to order the firing to cease, to end the awful sight. But the merciless 7-shooters and canister would not stop, and again the boasted flower of Lee's army was crushed into a disorderly mob and driven off. When the firing ceased, one could have walked for 200 yards down the ditch on the dead rebels without ever touching the ground. Of course, Colonel Wilder does not claim that his brigade defeated Longstreet. His statement refers only to that portion of the corps which entered the field in his front. He thinks that not less than 2,000 rebels were killed and wounded in this field. It was probably the most disastrous fire of the 2 days' fight on either side. You're probably looking across the ground where the Battle of Chickamuaga was the bloodiest when judged by the number of casualties per acre or per square yard.
The ditch that goes sort of north and south along the road, did it get fire, or
Well,
this ditch?
This arm of the ditch gets the true enfilade fire down along the entire length of it. The ditch that runs parallel to the road really does not have a true enfilade fire on it, but with 2 guns here, another 4 guns up here, he has a partial enfilade fire across the front of it. While he cannot fire right down into the length of the north-south ditch, firing across the front of it, and the Confederates are going to be able to sense you don't want to climb out of the ditch and try to come onto this side.
That's a natural funnel to the killing ground.
Right, yeah. howitzers.
Well, I mean, with howitzers, he'd have the ability to allow, because he probably had it already distanced out and knew exactly.
Well, his mountain howitzers are not down here. They're up at the Brotherton Field.
Oh, he didn't have that.
Yeah, he didn't have them down here. He's just got the 3-inch ordnance rifle, so he's really only got the flat trajectory direct fire weapons and doesn't have a lot of an arc. But the real key thing is that obviously Wilder and Lilly had noticed some of the subtleties in the terrain ahead of time, and they were able to react to them more carefully. So
there's only 2 charges that the Confederates made. The win and then one more.
Yeah, some of that varies a little bit by the accounts. There are 2 primary Confederate movements. Bushrod Johnson's division going off in that direction. And the first part of their movement will have them engaged directly out here in front. Then they go off that way. And then you have Hood's or Law's division coming from that direction this way. Now, you get varying accounts from both Benning's Georgia Brigade and Robertson's Texas Brigade of Hood's division about whether they make one single forward movement or do they do so in stages or kind of forward and then back, forward and back. Some of it, I think, is individual matter of perspective from the soldiers. Some soldiers might indeed have gone forward. Maybe they got out in front of the main body, and then they record that they go back and then go forward again. Particularly the Texans are pretty broken up. They're not moving forward nice, neat, orderly line by the time they get in around the buildings of the Viniard farms. All right.
Quick question about Wilder's men. Being mounted, they came here on horse, they got off their horse, and they were entirely on foot here?
Yes. In fact, they dismounted on September the 17th over at the Alexander House site.
And then they're on foot.
And particularly the men of the 17th Indiana and 98th Illinois that fight at Alexander's and then come back here. They do not see their horses again until the afternoon of the 20th. When they displaced from Alexander's back to the far eastern edge of the Vineyard Field, it was on foot. When they displace back here, it's on foot. When they go back to the position south of the Wilder Brigade Monument, it's on foot. Only when they are leaving the field on the afternoon of the 20th do they mount again on their horses back in the hills of Missionary Ridge. And when the 72nd Indiana and 123rd Illinois arrive here on the evening of the 18th, they dismount and their animals are kept to the rear too. The animals were just too valuable to have close to the firing line, so 1 man in 4 would take his own and 3 other animals to the rear. And this pack then of led horses simply moved back further as Wilder moved westward too, so to try to protect the animals as much as possible. Correct?
2 months later, you don't really hear much about Wilder and Lilly Chattanooga.
No, because there are a couple of factors. Greg's question was why we don't hear much more about Wilder and Lilly at Chattanooga or even really later in the war. And there are really a couple of factors for it, but one of the big ones is their biggest advocate, their biggest champion, their biggest supporter was William Stark Rosecrans. And what happened to Rosecrans in October?
He got inside.
Yep. And very few senior leaders at the time of the Civil War understand the use of horse-mounted troops, whether that's mounted infantry or cavalry or anything. There are very few good Army commander cavalry teams at the time of the Civil War. And even though this brigade largely stays together through the end of the war, you don't really see them doing much more because they get absorbed into the cavalry, and they, if you get David Evans' great book, Sherman's Horsemen, the Union Cavalry in the Atlanta Campaign, you'll see how poorly used the cavalry was. And in the midst of all that is Wilder's brigade. What Rosecrans recognized that you can do more with your mounted force, and he's gone. So that's really in the end kind of the biggest factor why we don't see more of this. Wilder is also sick. He leaves the army on September the 24th, comes back for a while in 1864, gets sick again, and then resigns and goes home. Lilly, probably reading the handwriting on the wall and also realizing that there's not much room for advancement in the artillery, Lilly took a commission from the governor of Indiana to be lieutenant colonel and then later colonel of the 9th Indiana Cavalry, and ended the war in the cavalry service. So, but Wilder and Lilly's interest in their role here continued in the post-war period. Of course, Wilder, as the successful entrepreneur, will come to Chattanooga after the war and exploit the coal and iron resources of southeast Tennessee and become fantastically wealthy, and provide much of the money for the Wilder Brigade Monument. Lilly, as he becomes a successful pharmacist, will be very involved in veterans activities as well. And in 1898, not long before he died, 3 years after the National Military Park was created, Eli Lilly made yet another visit to the Chickamuaga battlefield, this time when a photographer was nearby. And here's a picture of Eli Lilly standing by the two guns just in front of you there, looking across the ground where his battery had fought in 1863.
Where's that picture?
This is from the Eli Lilly Company archives in Indianapolis. So.
How hard is it to keep the field in its condition as it was that day?
Well, if you work at it and you don't let it grow up, it's not that difficult. But if you don't do something on a regular basis to keep the woodies knocked back, then you can lose it in just a couple of years' time. So instituting these places where we've cleared vegetation and the like, instituting the maintenance regimen has been our greatest challenge. So, Lilly's men, of course, wanted to commemorate their role here as well. Their monument is just over here, the first large one along the gun line there. And this is one of the few cases where we actually know who carved the monument. A member of the battery, Sidney Speed, who on September the 18th at the Alexander Farm had picked up an unexploded but still sputtering Confederate artillery projectile and thrown it over one of the log buildings of the Alexander farmstead, where it safely exploded and not injured any of the crew members. In the post-war period, became a stone carver in the Indiana limestone industry in central Indiana in the greater Bedford area. And when the veterans began to design their monuments, the veterans of Lilly's battery say, "We want Sidney Speed to carve ours." And he did. It's carved of Indiana limestone, and he brought it down here and supervised its erection right over there where it still stands today. And when you, if you take some time to look at Indiana battery and regimental monuments on the battlefield, look at the 18th Ohio Battery Monument, and then look at some of the others. And the 18th Indiana Battery Monument looks a little bit different. It's a little, the artistic style is a little bit different. The detail, the amount of detail on the monument is different. It reflects Sidney Speed's personal connection to the story. Most of the stone carvers who did the Indiana monuments were not Civil War veterans.
Hotchkiss. By chance, is this Hotchkiss the same artilleryman in the Confederate Army?
No.
Okay. No. Didn't think so, but...
Yeah.
It's the same Hardy, so.
All righty. We'll walk back down along the line. We'll stop at, or make our final stop at the monument there. The Lilly Battery monument. It's been, unfortunately, like so many of them here, vandalized to one degree or another. Part of the one broken off, and in fact, it recently was photographed. The photograph read, included in a publication and captioned as the 8th Indiana Battery. And then, of course, part of the wheel has been broken off. But this scene on it, the way that you have the inset here, the light battery there, some of these elements make this Indiana unit marker stand out as different from the general pattern that you see here. So.
Have they broken the barrel off of that gun, or is it
Yes.
short?
Yeah. No, it's been broken off too. So.
Barrel. Big word.
Speed probably made made it a little too fancy. One of the things the veterans do learn from the experience here, which they will then apply at Shiloh and Vicksburg, is the monuments do become slightly more vandal resistant between here in Shiloh and Vicksburg. It's not a huge difference, but if you go over to Shiloh and you look at those monuments kind of collectively, particularly the ones that were erected in 1894, right after Shiloh was created, they look a little more robust than some of ours here. They have less features on them which are susceptible to vandalism. So.
Was he ever recognized?
No, other than among